Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this free clip of aggressive progressives on the Young Turks. This is just a preview of what you will receive with TYT membership. That means exclusive interviews, panel discussions, and more of Jimmy, and of course, me. Check out this next clip, and if you like what you see, you can access full episodes of Aggressive Progressives by becoming a member. Head to tyt.com/join now.
Welcome to Aggressive Progressives. I am your fill-in host, Malcolm Flesher. Jimmy Dore is not here. I'm terribly sorry. He's still in Italy, still on location, still he's reporting. He's not really reporting back from Italy. He's sending tweets back of himself at various restaurants and all the food he's eating. But I'm excited to be guest hosting today. I have a great panel with me. Steve-O making a rare appearance on the show that bears his name.
I'm only here when Jimmy's here.
But much more exciting. Was that only three muches? But much more exciting. Abby Martin and Mike Preisner back for return engagement, and I'm super excited to have you guys joining us. Thank you so much for coming. Steve, thank you for rolling out of bed and making it over here. Appreciate it. Jimmy is, this is his last week in Italy. He's promised me that he is going to gain 5 pounds for every week that he's there.
Good.
We're calling it the fight for 15. And so when he comes back and he's bragging about how his clothes don't fit anymore because he's bursting his buttons and the like, we'll know whether he made it or not.
So I feel bad because like this side of the table over there on that side, they're dressed so nicely.
Actually nice.
You guys are dressed so nicely.
Yeah, I feel bad too.
Younger, more talented.
I feel really bad.
Well dressed, over here older, not shabby, just.
We're doing it for Jimmy. He's always got nice threads.
That's true. You were expecting that the first segment is mostly going to be dedicated to talking about clothes and collars and buttons and the like, but we actually did some of that beforehand, so I feel like we got that out of the way.
I am wearing killer sneakers though.
You want to show off your new sneakers?
No, it's too much effort. I might hurt myself. I'm lifting my leg.
They're cool though. They're really cool.
They're nice. Yeah.
So we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about whether people in the media should be unbiased in their perspective. They should have no bias, no perspective. They shouldn't care about anything, so they can report things in an unbiased fashion. And our feelings about that. We're going to talk about the climate crisis, and there's been a lot of chatter about that lately with the New York Times and a story that was sent around on Twitter a lot anyway, and based on the UN report about how limited time we have to deal with this before the risk of extinction of the human species, and so we got a lot to get to. But first, I wanted to talk to Mike and Abby. Most recently, your show Empire Files on Telesur it's on on hiatus. What are you calling this? It's brief period.
Hiatus.
Hiatus, and the reason it's on hiatus is why.
So we've had a contract with the Telesur network, which is several progressive Latin American countries, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, that fund this this state network that's a coalition of these 7 progressive governments. Argentina dropped out recently with its right-wing victory. But Venezuela being the main funder and it being headquartered in Venezuela, Venezuela has been a target for US regime change operations since President Chavez was elected in the late 90s. And then ever since then, there's been this effort with assassination attempts, coup attempts, one of which was successful for a few days, but also economic sanctions have been a major part of this regime change effort, trying to cripple the economy, make life very difficult for people, as we've seen in various regions of the world. It's a favored US tactic. But the sanctions really ramped up under the Trump administration. In particular, the day after President Maduro won re-election, a Democratic landslide victory, and then the day after Trump slapped the hardest sanctions yet in Venezuela. In fact, the worst sanctions in the entire region since the 1980s when the US was waging this Contra war in Nicaragua. And so as a result of that, it's impossible for funds for our show to be transferred from Caracas or from any other bank that's affiliated with Venezuela. And so we had our complete, the entire funding for our show. We were about to do a 3rd season with them, completely cut off. And so since then we launched a fundraising effort on GoFundMe and Patreon for the Empire Files. And so the status now is that we've raised enough money to restart production, which we're really excited about. Of course, it's on a limited basis, but we're going to be able, for the time being, continue the show for several more months as a result of this. But we're still working to raise more because, of course, we're nowhere near where we were getting with the Telesur network. But yeah, so it's where we love Telesur. It's a great network, but it's just the sanctions have made it impossible.
You were shooting out of Los Angeles.
We were in other places. I mean, a lot of what we were doing was on the ground documentaries. I mean, the show was both an interview series, but also kind of in-depth documentaries and on the ground investigations. And so we were in the front lines of the drug war in Colombia. We were all over the West Bank. We've been in Venezuela in the middle of the protest movement. And so the real thing that we want to continue to be able to do is to be able to do those real on the ground, sometimes life-threatening investigations to get the stories out that no one else is getting out, or the corporate media is doing in a complete disingenuous.
I don't know what you're talking about. I see stories about those topics on the mainstream media all the time.
Yeah, sanctions work.
Yeah. So that's sanctions. I mean, this is an effect of sanctions against Venezuela that has a real effect on stifling press freedom here in the United States.
Absolutely.
Can you guys speak a bit more about Venezuela? Because that's the favorite boogeyman. Whenever we talk about Bernie Sanders or any kind of DSA policies, people say, oh my God, what, you want us to be like Venezuela? So can you speak a little bit about what the issues are down there, why there are so many struggles? Is it all because of US sanctions? Or is there something more going on down there?
I mean, it's a combination, right? I mean, the U.S. sanctions, of course, are the major overarching thing. I mean, they intended to cripple the economy, and they do cripple the economy. But it's not just U.S. sanctions. It's that when the progressive government came into power, of course, you have the old rulers, the bankers, the big corporate rulers. They're still there. They weren't expropriated. They weren't kicked out of the country. And so many of the major industries are still run by Trump-like people, like far-right billionaires that control products that the entire country needs. And so 10 of the major staple food products are produced by one company who's actively involved in efforts to overthrow the government with the CIA and with the United States. And so you have all these other players that make a difference there. But I think that when people try to say that this is an example of socialism not working, despite the challenges of US attacks, despite the challenges of attacks from the billionaire right-wing class in the country, you have major social advancements and also this legacy of underdevelopment. I mean, it was an underdeveloped monocrop country, just like every other country in Latin America and Asia and the Middle East. It's underdeveloped for the plunder of the big powers. So when they're finally able to stand on their own, they have decades to go through of developing the country to be able to provide for the entire population. So in spite of all of that, in spite of all those major challenges, no one can argue that the immense social gains from providing 2 million brand new housing units to the poorest families, to making illiteracy go from one of the worst in the region to the best in the region, infant mortality from one of the worst in the region to one of the best rates in the world, across the board from healthcare to education to actual people's power to making people involved and active participants in the government and have power in the government. The strides are undeniable, and so
that's super interesting because you never hear about that in the U.S. ever. You hear about Maduro being a corrupt buffoon who dances sometimes, and how the country is living in squalor. People are losing weight because they can't eat enough. This is all because socialism is evil and does not work under any circumstance. That's what you hear in the U.S., but you're telling us a very different story.
Yeah, people they like to look at statistics now and of how they've changed over the past few years, but no one wants to go back to the pre-Chavez era and look at those statistics when the vast majority of the country was in deep, deep poverty, when economic crisis was causing actual starvation and actual complete destruction of life, and in fact, and a fascist government. I mean, when people rose up against neoliberal, the whole reason for this Chavez revolution is when people rose up against neoliberal reforms because everyone's life was completely destroyed at a level far, far worse than anything they're experiencing in terms of hardship and poverty now. The government cracked down on them and killed 3,000 people in the course of a week. I mean, this was a fascist state when this, and then
this is when
this is in the late 80s,
Before Chavez.
yeah. And then this movement was launched, and then people really took power. And so the one thing I'll say about Venezuela and our experience here, I mean, we spent a month on the ground in the middle of the worst parts of the protest movement, is that it's a legitimate popular movement. I mean, everywhere you go, you see Chavez, you see the PSUV, and you see people that are actively engaged in the process. I mean, you just drive around the streets and you see mass meetings happening of people just meeting about economic changes, just it's a poor people's government and it's extremely active and popular movement.
I just wanted to add one quick thing. There's not a general shortage of food, there's a general shortage of food items. And those are specific items that are hard to come by, and that's when you see these lines, et cetera. So the story is very skewed on an international scale. And also the opposition movement there that's glorified by people like John Oliver and Vice, and they run around and try to say that these protesters are great and they're actually holding back. The protesters, we were shocked to find this armed guarimba of the actual protest movement. And there's mass protests on both sides, and that's what you're not seeing. You're not seeing the side of the government protests that are supporting the government, but there's an armed armed element of these protests called guarimbas, and they were responsible for well over half of the deaths in that last kind of insurrection in Venezuela. And so people were lynched for being Afro-Venezuelan. There was socialist enclaves that were targeted, food distribution warehouses. I remember asking someone who was shirtless and had a pin grenade in his hand, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "I can't be an entrepreneur here." And so that just kind of made me think a little bit differently about it. I thought, wait, you guys are supposed to be a starving nation that's, attacking the government because you're so desperate. You're telling me that you can't own a business, and that's why you're burning down a food distribution warehouse. So it became a little bit more murky when we were on the ground.
That sounds vaguely like they attacked 9/11. They attacked the World Trade Center because they hate us for our freedom.
Right? Yeah. Exactly.
That doesn't seem like a good enough reason.
Yeah.
And you can't own a business in Venezuela. Like small and medium-sized business owners are generally pro Socialist Party, and so they're generally with the government. It's the big corporate powers that are feeling that their rights are being infringed on.
Yeah, and then you see Colombia, the NATO expansion there, and just like the trained militias and paramilitaries that are bleeding into Venezuela and exacerbating the crime. But yeah, the opposition, when you get down to the nitty-gritty, there's a very violent arm, and it's completely ignored by U.S. corporate media.
Yeah, Venezuela is the kind of story that is ideal for the U.S. media not to cover
Right.
in an unbiased fashion, and that's what you get. All right, we got to take a break,
Okay.
but I think the solution to people if they're going hungry in Venezuela is more U.S. sanctions. That's a good idea. That's really going to solve that problem. Hey, welcome back to Aggressive Progressives. I'm Malcolm Fleshner, sitting in for Jimmy Dore, who is busy eating his weight in cannoli in Italy. And we're talking with Steve-O and Abby Martin and Mike Preisner. They were just talking about their experiences in Venezuela and covering that. We're going to move on to talk about what the previous year you went to. That's dangerous. Venezuela is a dangerous situation to cover as journalists. So you went someplace super safe, which was Gaza. And what were you there for, and what were you doing?
We actually spent a month in the West Bank. We actually weren't allowed into Gaza. I went to Gaza in 2009 after one of the massacres, the Israeli massacres there. But we actually went to the West Bank for on-the-ground investigative documentaries, which we have on the Empire Files YouTube channel. But we wanted to get into Gaza to report on the humanitarian crisis there. But the Israeli press office denied us because they said we were Iranian spies and that we were propagandists, not journalists. And so we weren't able to actually get into Gaza. But
they said you guys are Iranian spies.
Yeah,
So
I
they're
thought we
Iranian
were
spies.
Russian and Venezuelan spies,
Yeah,
so I was
that's
confused how
amazing.
it became Iranian.
I don't know where that came from, but yeah, apparently we are. But no, so because of we weren't allowed in, we actually recently hired a team of journalists in Gaza to report on the Great March of Return, which is going on, which Abby can say more about. But we have, as when our funding problem happened with Telesur, we were just about to complete post-production on all of this footage that we had gotten from an amazing, really brave team of journalists in Gaza, showing everything from daily life, daily hardship, daily happiness, and also the real heroic actions taking place at the border fence, which have claimed the lives of nearly 200 people now.
Right, so Gaza is a place that the UN declares is going to be uninhabitable by 2020. We're talking about 90% of the water is unpotable. We're talking about a couple hours of electricity a day. It's pretty hard to imagine how devastating it is to really live in this enclave. And 2 million people are trapped in this open-air prison, 2/3 of which are actually refugees expelled and expunged from their land, ethnically cleansed just mere miles away. So, the West Bank is under brutal military occupation where people are being brutalized, raided, killed on a daily basis there. But Gaza is really just this abysmal pocket that is completely ignored by the international community. And again, we are sponsoring these atrocities with $10 million of US taxpayer money every day. So, of course these people are protesting. And they've said themselves they have nothing to live for. And so they're risking their lives every Friday to go out there and protest this occupation. And in one day, when that embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, 60 people were gunned down in cold blood from snipers. We're talking about just mere feet from the fence, from this, and I don't want to call it a border fence because it's literally a prison fence dividing people from their own land. And so it's just shocking to think that snipers were putting people in their crosshairs. We're talking about children, amputees, journalists, medics, 60 people in one day. And the front page of the New York Times the next day was, Israelis reflect. I hope at least every bullet was justified. And there's been reports proving it doesn't matter what they say about Hamas militants. These are children and journalists. And it came out that not one has been armed. Not one. So this story needs to be told. It's been told in fragments, but we need to put it together and just show exactly what's going on and how the world is turning a blind eye.
Yeah, I mean, I try to imagine if this were going on and it were if it were Iran, for example, that were gunning people down at the border like this. And I mean, one quip. I mean, when you mentioned that they have electricity for only a few hours a day, and 90% of the water is not potable, that's not just natural. That's a choice that's being made, and Gaza is slowly they're ratcheting down the livability scale to making it worse and worse. The Israelis who control Gaza, and I actually take some issue with calling it an open air prison, because when you run a prison, you are required to provide food and health care and so on and so forth. It's more like an open air concentration camp, but that people who are fans of the right wing government of Israel don't like you calling it a concentration camp for understandable reasons, but you got to call it like it is. And so, and the important thing to remember is that yes, $10 million a day. The United States, we fund this, much as we're funding the killings in Yemen. And if it's a government that you're supporting, an ally of yours, and they're gunning down children in cold blood, this, and they're described in the New York Times or elsewhere as clashes.
Yeah.
There's no clash when you're unarmed and you get shot by a sniper. So, but I think that with the Trump administration coming into power, Netanyahu has realized it's open season. Now is the time to grab as much as I can and to take as much of the West Bank, and the Gazans I can make it immiserate them even more. And we're seeing that the international community, led by the United States, is not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, he's doing completely the bidding of Sheldon Adelson. And I just found out that Sheldon Adelson just paid for the entire half of the GOP's congressional budget. I mean, this is a really strong magnate. And his whole goal is to restart war with Iran and to basically eliminate Palestine and Palestinian refugees. And that's exactly what we've seen Trump do with the elimination of that hundreds of millions of dollars of funds to try to keep up the error that we're, working for a two-state solution here. It's just completely off the table. Trump has done more than any other president to devastate Palestine and just do the bidding of Netanyahu and other extreme Zionists. So it's pretty disheartening.
Yeah, I mean, that embassy move was like, I mean, that was the real green light. That was the signal that you are free. I mean, Israel and the United States, they have a congruent interest in the region, but they don't have the same interest in the region. So sometimes you've seen clashes between the interests of the US government and the Israeli government. Under Obama, especially, you saw that. Netanyahu coming to Congress to give a speech without approving it with the executive branch, things like that. I mean, that's kind of unprecedented level of things. The US wants a military garrison to exert its influence in the region, the most geostrategic region of the world. Israel is this attack dog in the region for them. But Israel doesn't just want to be an attack dog for the United States. It wants to build greater Israel. It wants all of that land. It wants land in Syria, Lebanon, and all of the remaining Palestinian territories. And so those interests usually go together smoothly, but sometimes they clash. And so when Trump came in, he's basically like, green light, now is your chance, 4 years, maybe 8 years, to move as aggressively as you want to. And I'm glad you mentioned this idea of like, shooting children, because I think it's very easy for people to imagine it's a chaotic situation. There's like American Sniper style. Oh, does that kid have a gun? I gotta shoot him real quick. We're in the middle of a clash. But the way these are sniper teams that are posted up for hours. You have sniper teams have an assistant who's looking at even more zoomed in binoculars. They acquire a target. They radio for permission to shoot the target. They're seeing it very clearly, very close up. This is very deliberate. So when you hear that 12-year-old after 12-year-old after 12-year-old was shot in the head by a sniper, or a young woman medic after young woman medic after young woman medic was shot in the head by a sniper, these are not chaotic incidents. These are very deliberate, confirming
it's not the haze of war.
Right, exactly. I mean, these are targeted assassinations. And so I think the flip side, though, is yes, Trump has allowed this kind of, I mean, they've done horrible things like this in the past. It's in a new phase in terms of how quickly they're expanding settlements and aggression. But I think it's having this reverse effect where people are seeing this. I mean, people can see clearly what's going on there and are repulsed by it. Just like every time there's an Israeli war on Gaza, it causes an uptick in people's consciousness because it's very hard to bury any further. And so if anything good is gonna come of this, of the heroic, every Friday they're going out and just getting shot at the border fence. No guns, no violence. I mean, they're just going out on their own land to protest and they're being murdered, and they're going out time and time again because they know that if people see it elsewhere in the world, then it could lead to an international crisis that causes some resolution to this. And so I just want, it's
just crazy to hear when people say, oh, well, they were Hamas. And it's like, what does that mean? First of all, everything in Gaza is considered a Hamas target by Israeli forces. And second of all, that doesn't mean anything. So we're just executing people and just saying, oh, well, in retrospect, they belong to a political party. I mean, come on. How dehumanized have we made Palestinians? Oh, they're a death cult. They worship death. No, we've been to Palestinian funerals. The mothers wail the same way that anyone would around the world when their child is lost. So it's just devastating.
When can we expect to be able to see it, do we think?
Probably in the next month and a half, 2 months, we'd say. But we want to make it in 2 parts or 3 parts. So we're trying to make it really, one documentary specifically focused on the Great March of Return, another one just on how life is in Gaza, and then one kind of a more hopeful aspect, because that's what the journalists that I talked to that we hired begged us. They said, can you please pass on the message that we don't want to die and that we love life? And they said, instead of focusing on how much we suffer, let's also show them what binds us together as a society and as a culture. And so we're going to try to show that as well.
And I mean, then you were also in the West Bank, though. You had to be in the West Bank for this because they wouldn't let you into Gaza.
Right.
And I think a lot of the focus and attention, because of the March of Return, what's happening is on Gaza. But what's going on in the West Bank is still, we covered it on the Friday postgame last week, how essentially Israel has has divided the West Bank in half now, or is on the process of dividing it in half, and creating these, their so-called Bantustans, where Palestinians, to get from one area of the West Bank to another, it's just time-consuming and they're humiliated. And it's the whole point of Israel, what they're doing is trying to drive the Palestinians out without actually having to massacre them, which is what I mean. But it's essentially ethnic cleansing, making life so miserable for them. But life for the settlers is smooth and easy. They have none of these, but they bypass all the Palestinian settlements so they can travel freely. But life for Palestinians in the West Bank is also extraordinarily difficult, especially to get to work if they work in Israel. So that's, I mean, there are 2 sides of this story, but it's part of the larger picture of Israel, as you pointed out, essentially wants to take over the whole region and just get rid of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And anybody who is pretending to deny that, or alleging that Israel is interested in a 2-state solution where you would be dismantling the settlements, you have to be delusional on a level of maybe even Susan Collins delusional. that bad. And we are going to talk about some domestic politics in a segment I like to call Off Their Feed, which I thought was funny because going off your feed, if you're an animal, like a livestock, it means they stopped eating and there's something wrong with them. And there's a Twitter feed, but it turns out nobody knows what that expression means. So I can't get our editing team to make me a little animation with it. But I will. One day I'll have my animation. But anyway, so what we do is we talk about certain tweets that I found intriguing or interesting or worth discussing from the past week. So let's go to the first one, which is from Nicholas Fandos. He wrote, "The tactics that were used completely backfired. Harassing members at their homes, crowding the halls with people acting horribly. The effort to humiliate us really helped me unify my conference. So I want to thank these clowns." Now that's Mitch McConnell talking about all of the activism involved around fighting the Kavanaugh nomination. The women who famously now accosted Jeff Flake in an elevator, and we're given a lot of props for that. And there's just the general descent on DC, or general dissent, period, and the descent onto DC of protesters who voicing their opinions about the Kavanaugh nomination and trying to stop him. But Mitch McConnell here is saying, hey, that's the best thing that ever happened to us because that helped bring us together. You people all screaming at us made us huddle together for fear for our lives, and we decided we only have each other and all of our billionaire corporate donors to protect us and the military. So is Mitch McConnell being sincere that he appreciates it, or do you think he's full of it? Steve, I ask you.
He's totally full of it. It didn't matter if there's no protests, if there's a 1 million person protest. This is what they're going to do anyway. Yeah.
So you think he's being disingenuous, and by suggesting that he appreciated all the protesting?
No, his point is next time don't protest because it'll have no impact on me. So he's trying to take away the incentive to protest in the future. That's
all right. He's concern trolling, right? He's saying, you don't want to do that in the future because it didn't really work this time. Do you believe we
No, of course.
I mean, I consider Mitch McConnell a really sincere guy.
And very handsome.
Yeah, extremely handsome. I love the no neck. No, I mean, I think he's disgusting. I think that we should have had 10 times more protests shutting down the entire Supreme Court. I think that that's exactly what's needed to move legislation, to move policy, to move any sort of action on the Hill. That's all that it's going to take. We can no longer really count on the Democrats to stop this process. It's pretty horrifying.
Yeah, and the people he's calling clowns, I mean, from what I remember from the protests against Kavanaugh, it was led by, and the majority of the significant actions were survivors of sexual assault who were confronting this because they, of course, feel more closely connected to it. And so calling those people clowns, I mean, he's calling survivors of sexual assault, particularly women, clowns for objecting to an attempted rapist being on the Supreme Court. And so that's really, it's doubling down on this really anti-woman, misogynist faction that has now, launched a coup in the Supreme Court. But I think that also what's behind that statement is that they really were scared. I mean, the protest did freak them out. It was hitting them hard where they did not want to be hit. And I think that there is a moment where the Republican Party really thought that Kavanaugh was going to be defeated by the protest movement. And so they were very nervous, and then when they had this big victory where they were able to ram him through, they were just gloating because they were going from a position of being terrified and worried about what was gonna happen to being, feeling very accomplished with what they've done.
And it's just more gaslighting victims and women in general. I mean, for example, Trump goes out there and says, it's a very scary time for young men in America. I mean, welcome to the club. Here we are, women can't even go to their cars in parking lots without thinking they're gonna get accosted. So yeah, it's pretty absurd to have Trump, the most powerful person on the planet, say, yeah, it's really terrifying for young men, once again victimizing Kavanaugh and himself, frankly, saying, oh, we're shrouded with all these false allegations. I mean, come on, he has 22 allegations against him. Anyone who listened to Ford's testimony understands that she is telling the truth. There's no reason for her to lie. She was a very accomplished woman. She wasn't trying to do this for fame or glory. In fact, she's had to basically go into hiding because of all the death threats against her. So
she had to move 4
it's just
times
shocking.
So
Yeah, but according to Trump
hometown,
supporters, he's the victim.
Yeah, you're right. I think they are scared. I think he's scared. I think Jeff Flake was scared. I think Susan Collins is scared, and they should be because the civility police are going to be disbanded, I think, and this is what they should expect from now on. So, and his alleging to the contrary is not going to work. All right, let's move on to our next one. This is from Mother Jones. That Susan Collins says she believes Blasey Ford was assaulted, but not by Kavanaugh. This is her angle that she came around to, which is I believe everyone. Everyone's telling the truth. Nobody's a bad actor here, but essentially what she's saying is. I don't believe Blasey Ford, but without actually saying that. Is this? How do you hold this thought in your head? And is it possible that she's the one who is really the delusional? And we talk about Donald Trump and how he needs to be assessed medically. But if Susan Collins really believes this, then I think she needs a serious investigation into her mental health.
No, she doesn't believe it. So I've always maintained that the pressure on Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins to do quote unquote do the right thing is unfair. I mean, why is it only women that are pressured to doing the right things for women? Men have the same pressure. Men also have a duty to do the right thing towards women. That said, Susan Collins, I find especially despicable because of her incredibly hollow and fake rationale.
Yeah, disingenuous.
Really, you believe everyone's telling the truth. There's no bad guys, and what can we do? There's nothing I can do, right? I would have more respect for her if she just said, look, I like Kavanaugh, he's my guy, I'm gonna vote for him, right? But to pretend she cares at all about Dr. Ford's testimony and what she went through, what a joke. It's an embarrassment to her.
It's worse than if she said, I think he did this, but he was a kid, and I think he's reformed himself, even though he maybe not remember it because for whatever reason it wasn't a big deal to him, and I'm just gonna vote. But it's super insulting to all of our intelligence.
Absolutely.
To her, her standing, like it's so preposterous as to even for the standard of a Republican senator, which is pretty low. Yeah. Let's be honest.
I mean, Ford's testimony is evidence. People keep forgetting that. They say, oh, there's no evidence of these allegations against him. That is evidence. That's why testimony is put up in a court of law to say, this happened to me. She experienced this, and she even said, I'm 100% certain that this was the man. So I just don't understand this whole I believe Kavanaugh and I believe you. I mean, she even had the audacity to say that Kavanaugh could bring some sort of equality and harmony to the court that's so desperately needed in these times of, incivility or whatever the hell she's saying.
Rapists and non-rapists create a harmony.
There you
Gotta
go.
get a rapist on for all the.
So the other thing that drives me crazy is this, throwing out this standard, beyond the reasonable doubt, innocent until proven guilty. This is not a trial.
Right.
This is not a criminal proceeding. So different events have different standards of proof. So in a criminal case, if you're going to deprive someone of their liberty, you have the burden of proving it beyond reasonable doubt. In a civil proceeding, it's just a preponderance of the evidence. In a job interview like this, it's just whatever you want, man, right? I mean, really, like if you're running anything, if you're running, let's say, a preschool, would you hire this guy to run your preschool? Absolutely not. Would you hire this guy to run your store? I mean, your 7-Eleven store? I wouldn't, right? I mean, if he came out and said, look, that was a long time ago. I made some mistakes. I'm a different person. I'm very sorry. I might actually consider that, right? Because not for the Supreme Court, but for like a store manager, because I don't think you should be held, responsible for something forever if you own up to it, admit to the mistake. If he says, I'm a changed man. But if he's gonna say, I didn't do it, and the woman is saying, I am 100% sure that he did it, and there's that cloud of suspicion. And then on top of that, additional women are coming out saying he did it. How can you have this guy on the Supreme Court? What, there's no other human being that can fit that spot? There's no other pro-lifer? There's a reason why they need him. It's because of his deference towards presidential authority, his belief that a sitting president should not ever be indicted, that he's above the law, and they need him for that.
Plus, he's also a pro-corporatist and he's pro-life, and so
right.
all those other things that he checks the boxes for both the president and the Republican Party in general. Skip the next two, go straight to the one from Tim Nichols. This post is because I assume that men are not going to be the ones to carry November for the Democrats, and that women will have to offset them, and that young people in particular have miserable turnout. Lesson always, Dems are so bad at politics. Okay, so that's what he's saying, that the Democrats are terrible and women are gonna have to bail them out. And then there was this response tweet from John Schwartz at The Intercept, who said, the Democrats aren't bad at politics, it's just that the goal of the people who run the Democratic Party isn't to win elections. Their goal is to continue to run the Democratic Party. If you understand that, you'll see that they're actually extremely good at politics. Who's right? Are the Democrats good at what they do, or are they bad at what they do?
It's a very interesting framing. I think they're good at what they do. I think Schwartz is exactly right. They are there to bring in the money and get paid. They're not there to win elections.
If they win, that's great. I'm sure they're happy to win.
Sure.
But the problem is if you win with Bernie Sanders and he cleans house, then you don't run the Democratic Party anymore.
That's right.
If you lose to Trump, you still are in charge of the Democratic Party. That's what I think. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's why they keep trying to pull in Republican or moderate voters instead of eking 1 inch left. And that's why we've seen just the constant takeover from basically centrists. And that's giving them too much credit, I think. I mean, corporate Democrats have just taken over and instilled and institutionalized the corporate takeover. I mean, they will refuse to let people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or anyone like her really get more power than they already have. They can't. One more thing about Kavanaugh. I mean, it actually could be true that he doesn't remember it because people like him and Trump sexually assault women so often.
I totally agree.
That it could be very well that he did this.
You expect me to remember every single time I sexually assaulted? This one wasn't even successful.
But for women, they never forget.
I don't dwell on my failures.
Women never forget.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoy this free clip of aggressive progressives on the Young Turks. This is just a preview of what you will receive with TYT membership. That means exclusive interviews, panel discussions, and more of Jimmy, and of course, me. If you like what you saw, you can access full episodes of Aggressive Progressives by becoming a member. Head to tyt.com/join now.